صباح الخير وأهلا بكم في هذه الجلسة التي نحاول من خلالها
We'll start in this session through which we try to approach one of the most sensitive and complicated journalistic tasks, to investigate in war crimes and to understand the methodologies that do enable researchers and journalists to protect the truth even in the darkest situations. Today, we're not talking only about documentation, nor do we talk about journalistic narratives only. However, we're talking about an ethical and legal responsibility that those who are in the fields are responsible for. We are also talking about the historical role that that journalism has played and still playing in terms of protecting the memories, supporting justice, and fighting hiding evidence. War crimes in our area have not started yesterday or today. Since 1948, more than 750,000 Palestinians have been displaced, continuing with the continuous genocide in Gaza now, and what is happening in the West Bank, and also the massacres and the forced displacement in Syria, genocide in Sudan, and conflicts that have torn up Iraq, Libya, and Yemen. And if the legacy of war lasts for decades, then the need for investigative journalism lasts over same decades as well. In this session, I'm going to start from a main question: how may a journalist investigate a war crime, preserve evidence, protect witnesses, and build a track that is supported by legal enlightenment? How can we do that? So now I'll start welcoming my three guests. Maggie Michel is an investigative journalist who got the Pulitzer Award and a number of international awards. She was known with her investigations in Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. She has exposed so many attempts of starvations and forced displacements and so on and so forth, and she relied on satellite images, and she built accurate lines for crimes to track the lines, in addition to hundreds of testimonies that constitute an important file in defeating such cases. Raji Abd Salam, legal data, is a legal data archive analyst with experience in documenting war crimes from Syria, Iraq, and Ukraine, and he worked on collecting some evidence that will be accepted in the court, and his investigation of hundreds of testimonies contributed to holding Syrian war criminals and perpetrators of crimes against humanity accountable under universal jurisdiction. And last but not least, Aziza Al-Nofal. She is an investigative journalist specialized in documenting violations in the West Bank and also collective punishment, maltreatment of prisoners. She has presented very solid investigations over several international platforms that exposed the impact of occupation on civilians and participated in so many files related to sensitive topics. Maggie, I'll start with you in this question. I'll start from Sudan. While following up all the massacres that extended the procrastinated, and extended crimes in Sudan, and you state that, how have you managed to build an accurate track through satellite images and geographical analysis and all these things? How have you managed to organize all these things and to prove that what's been happening on the ground is really compound war crimes? Thank you, Magdalene. Good morning. What is happening now in Al-Fasher is a continuation of 2 years of massacres. Nevertheless, Al-Fasher has finally got attention after 2 years of suffering. War in Sudan started in April 2023, and it mainly started with the capital, Khartoum. And this differs from all other wars in Sudan that used to hit the peripheries, be it Darfur or the southern areas. So the focus was so much on Khartoum, yet at the same time, other massacres were taking place in the west of Darfur, particularly in Al Junaina city, which is half an hour exactly half an hour away from Chad's border. At that time, a quick response team supported by Arab militias and supported by the UAE in weapons and others have attacked the neighborhoods of Al-Masalit, and Al-Masalit are one of the African tribes whose main homeland is Al Junaina. Over 2 months, they've conducted a long series of massacres using all types of crimes that anyone may think of, such as like rapes, mass killings, killing males in particular, boys and infants, so that they don't grow up to be fighters in the future. They managed to displace all those who were living in Al Junaina from the Al Masalit ethnicity. So we, as journalists, we have to cover that. We have to document this, and we have to track who have committed this crime. No one could get into Argentina because it was really difficult with the quick response team, so no one could enter there. So the solution was that for us as journalists is to go to the Chadi's borders. There was around 500,000 displaced person coming from Al Junaina city. We are talking about a whole city that got uprooted. Well, the documentation was not easy at all. I would like to give you some background on Maggie. I tried to attract Maggie to come and lecture us. I've been doing this ever since she got the Pulitzer Award in the War of Yemen. Maggie has always been busy. She's never there because she's always in the field. And when we started talking about Sudan, she said, well, Majdulin, the problem of documenting war crimes is that we are really seeing the woes of war, and the place that journalists should be at are journalists are not there, unfortunately. So I'd really like to salute you, Maggie, because you were there, you were their voice, and you took the initiative to be in Sudan. Thank you. So maybe she's crying now because she has remembered the tremendous events that took place. And we all know that Sudan, unlike other conflicts, Sudan's war has not been documented completely. Okay, we'll move to the other speaker. Raji, I would like to ask you a question. I remember that I watched a very interesting workshop for you, and I would never forget it. And this is like an open invitation. If anybody sees a future workshop held by Raji, you have to attend it because you'd never forget the content. You talked about human testimonies and how important they are in terms of documenting war crimes. However, documenting that and to know that this testimony is complete, we need evidence that will support these testimonies. So how can we identify the methodology needed to identify types of pieces of evidence and to tell that this testimony indicates war crime? Thank you, Mr. for the question. Thanks for everybody. I'm really sorry because my Arabic language is not that fluent. So if I use English terminologies, please put up with me. Okay, the first point, every valid documentation. Okay, let's get back one step. In the court that gives the description, because to describe or to label and to say that like this is a crime against humanity or this is a genocide or this is our crime is the prosecutor general who reviews everything we've collected. First, we need to remember that all complaints start with human testimony. We always remember, and we always need to remember that what I am holding between my hands is not an indictment list only, but it is a whole human being with a full spectrum of humanitarian feelings and shocks. And also, this person, be it a man or a woman, they also have their own objectives that I have to respect, regardless whether I agree with them or not. So we need to start with this testimony and then end up with a whole matrix of supportive pieces of evidence, images, medical reports, sometimes intersections with other witnesses or other resources, sometimes There could be things in the place itself. So all these things must be compiled, documented, and after that presented following two tracks. The methodology we follow is CCC, correct, concrete, coherent. So everything said by the witness must be documented, must be written down, even if it's impossible sometimes. Like some witnesses, considering the situation, sometimes they say things that are impossible to happen. One of the female witnesses, for example, once said, when they started shelling, I stopped feeling my body, and I started to look up myself. Actually, she couldn't see herself, but she was the one who was getting beaten, so she couldn't visualize herself as another person coming to her. Another witness said, when the house was demolished, a light came and a man carried me away. Well, if I say this in front of the judge in the court, it would be scary, but I have to write this because credibility obliges me to write down everything witnesses say. On the other hand, I may withdraw the facts and create two lines. The first one, chronicle one, and the second follows the sequence of events. And I start comparing between both lines, and after that, I bring in supportive documents. What things may contribute to the coherency here? Documents, images, medical reports, sometimes genetic reports, etc. And I start gathering them. And when I do so, I need to have the right metadata, and that's what I'm going to answer in a different question if needed. Okay, we'll definitely take advantage of your presence here, and we'll ask you so many questions. Aziza, in your reports, particularly on the violence committed by settlers and how they kicked families out of their lands, what methodology do you follow in order to prove that such practices are not individual cases, however, a methodological displacement policy? Because as you know, the Israeli narrative has always been clear. This is an administrative order. This is something we have to do, and so on and so forth. Well, as Raji said, we need to be objective and we need to be capable of collecting testimonies because we are in the field. Sometimes we get there immediately once an event takes place, and this gives us good space because we'll be able to take testimonies firsthand from primary sources, and this is a point of strength for the people who are at the areas of conflict. They can take testimony quickly and firsthand by victims, whereby even the victim or the person who is going to give the testimony will be able to say it in a way that is better than taking same testimony after a while or some time. Nevertheless, in terms of covering cases related to, or if we feel that this is a policy, not individual acts, this depends on accumulations and following up a situation, and by following up patterns, tracking patterns, and so on and so forth. For example, I cannot say that the violence committed by settlers at this stage, post October 7th, and the genocide against Gaza, I can't say this is individual act. Previously, 22 years ago, we as journalists sometimes used to say that these are individual cases. Nevertheless, if you look at the situation currently and how things are happening, how aggressions are taking place, the contexts in which aggressions are taking place, we as journalists, it would be really difficult for us to be able to cover the violence of settlers relying on testimonies only. Testimonies are very important. We need to take the primary testimony. Nevertheless, we have extended contexts that are related to how to link this to the international law, for example, the one that is related to the reports committed and documented by legal institutions and institutions that don't follow up with the cases of settlement, and the ones that do in a way or another indicate that this is a methodological, a systematic act, not individual act and sporadic here and there. We need to link reports to statistics, link report to numbers, link reports to the mechanism that the implementation is taking place. And there is another important point also that we need to follow up these groups. And here we go to the second stage. During the first stage, we have furnished a quick, brief report regarding covering the incident, the event. However, after that, we start with an investigative investigation in order to go deep and to know what is happening. So the main methodology in such cases is to go to the root cause of the problem, and the root cause of the problem lies in following with those groups. We need to know who finances them, how were they formed, who formed them, what political Israeli political parties formed them, and there is another deeper dimension, that is the religious dimension, and how to link this to religious contexts and the Torah beliefs that they claim. Like, for example, so many people here might not be aware of what do I mean, but recently, after the genocide on Gaza, we noticed that most of the aggressions committed by settlers do take place between the area extending between the north of Ramallah to the south of Nablus. In the Torah, this area is the house of God, Beit El, the house of God, and the extremist settlers and the most extremist settlers do reside in that area. That's the first kingdom for them. So there are different contexts, and we try to do this journalistic linkage. And the journalist needs to go further than the testimonies and the incident that took place when it comes to covering such cases. Thank you, Aziza, for this full answer. Now, Maggie, I'll get back to you. We know that when you cover something, be it Yemen, Sudan, or Syria, and if you want, we can stick to Sudan as well. You collected pieces of evidence and testimonies from different governorates and provinces. What mechanisms do you follow in order to avoid repetitions or making mistakes in testimonies, noting that, as everybody knows, Maggie is a contributor to a chapter on scrutinizing pieces of evidence in the manual of tracking war crimes that we published 2 years ago. So she has a chapter there. So tell us about the methodology that you follow, be it in Sudan or other areas. Well, in order to get accurate information on incidents that do take place, particularly in Sudan or in any other country, we need to keep testimonies as they are. And the more or the better documented the testimonies are, like in terms of like a voice recording that have been transcribed, and then establishing a full database with the names of witnesses, or if they were victims, I need to mention locations, timings, what is so special about these testimonies. Usually, I use the simplest thing, which is spreadsheets, and I keep them in order to create like the linkages, cross linkages between different testimonies. In this case, I can double check, for example, that in this incident, in that location, at that time, something happened, and I need to have at least 4 or 5 testimonies for the same incident. I need testimonies that will support what I add here. Of course, should there be any weakness in the testimony? Could it be contradicted or conflicting testimonies, or if the speaker changes his words more than once? Because sometimes one of the methods that we follow in order to double check something, we can ask, or actually we ask the person over days, not to have a one-time dialogue. If this person is a main witness in the investigation, so over days we may feel that some contradictions took place, or maybe there were no contradictions at all. Everything was matching in this case. You can be rest assured that his testimony is valid. The other important thing, as Aziza mentioned, that it is not only testimonies. However, we relied a lot on satellite images, particularly when it comes to mass graves and the frequency of burials. For example, in Al Junaina area, you find that the witnesses, for example, they're saying that during the 25th of April, 26th of April, we buried 50 dead bodies here, 60 bodies there. So in satellite images, we can check how compatible that is with what they said by looking at the images, or how the form of soil changed during those times, and diggings and so on and so forth. And of course, this will be supported by any videos or images. But as for Darfur, the first thing that the quick response team teams done is that they took phones from all population there. So it was really difficult to have something pictured or images taken from as an evidence. But actually, some people managed to have the photos smuggled somewhere else, and they managed to take pictures. So satellite images, pictures, matching testimonies with incidents. Okay, Maggie, I'd like to stick to you. I have a question out of curiosity, if you allow me. You are an Egyptian journalist, and you covered in-depth investigations, first class, actually, investigations in Yemen, Libya. What homework do you do when you start this work? Because in order for you to be able to cover war crimes in Syria or in Sudan, you need to be fully acquainted with all nuances in the Sudanese community, for example, or the Syrian community, or in Libya. So how did you manage to do that? Because I heard that uh, you're known that you'll be new in a certain community. After 1 to 2 months, you will start knowing more than the journalists living in those countries themselves. So what do you exactly do? What trick do you follow? No, it doesn't make sense that I know more than homeland journalists. Well, I don't work alone. I work with a team. Usually, the country we work in, like Syria, for example, we've been working there for a whole year. Ever since the falling took place until now, there is a series of investigations on Syria. So, amongst the members of our team are Syrian journalists because there are certain parts that do require certain sensitivities and knowledge. So, I believe that the most important thing that the journalist needs to do is to keep researching and to keep reading, and also reporting, to publish the reporting. Actually, 20% of the investigation needs to be done before we get to the place itself. And these investigations or the initial reporting needs to be through accessing those same witnesses, the very same witnesses, in order to know what is happening. So how can we build an idea about what is happening unless we prepare ourselves for that? We need to read very well in advance, and we need to follow up with the social media. And I believe that social media is a double-edged sword, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, it is a treasure box at the same time, because there is a huge number of people who can express themselves and express what is happening, and to take pictures and videos and to monitor everything and publish it on social media. So social media is very important, and definitely lots of filtration takes place in order to figure out or to be able to know who says the truth and who is fabricating things. Yet in reality, social media is very important when it comes to helping you and giving you idea to get help you get an idea about what's happening on the ground. Okay, thanks, Maggie. I'll get back to you, Raji. Raji, you spoke briefly about the three phases. You said that usually you follow a three phases methodology, CCCs, in order to listen to testimonies and to transcribe them. First of all, what are these stages? And I'm not an archivist at the end of the day, nor am I an expert. I am a journalist with limited tools. So how can I utilize this methodology? How can I learn it? And how would this help me by the end of the day to have a strong testimony to be admissible in the court, in the international court? Well, thanks for the question, Ms. Jolene. First, the methodology we follow is a pure or an abstract scientific methodology, and any scientific methodology would be of use in three things, whether you are a journalist or a judge or an investigator. Because if I get this testimony and Maggie got this testimony and Aziza got that testimony, the three testimonies need to match at a very high level. Definitely there'll be some nuances, but definitely there'll be matching, big matching. So unless I am capable of saying, we call this replicability. If I can't make sure that this with testimony will be replicable, it won't be accepted. It makes no sense, because in order for something to be accepted, all what's said by different parties has to be coherent. This methodology is all that used to be used in sciences and research, and we brought it into litigation field. Why? Because it's easy actually when you are handling one testimony or two, one image or two images, one video or two videos. Okay, that's okay. But let's imagine that someone went to Al-Fasher, or someone spoke to 6,000 refugees. That's a huge number. If each of the testimonies was around 16 pages and they are all full of facts, shocks, and so on and so forth, so this would be a problem. So the CCC, the first stage, we hear everything they say. Correct. The second stage, we try to look at all what's been said by the witness and try to connect facts in order to indicate that there is a crime happening. Because until this moment, we can't say this is a crime, a war crime, because there are judges. Some people do have the power, and the power that journalists can have. Me, as an archivist, working on the legal dimensions, I can't do that. But the journalist can do something called like naming and shaming. They have the ability to turn into a fourth authority, public opinion authority, and to describe something as a war crime. However, when we want to take this to the court, things will change. And there was a colleague yesterday talked about that. It was an amazing presentation, and he really spared me lots of effort when it comes to what I'm going to talk about today. So we need to have a clear point for the person in front of me and for the person whom I'm going to accuse. So these things start with the fact that I collect the information properly, I turn it into facts, and then I will go to the third pillar, which is coherency. Any investigative journalist needs to follow or to do that logically. Maybe they are not following all the steps, but by the end of the day, we get to a similar result. The final result will be, instead of 16 pages, it will be 1 page only, just a summary, an abstract that is very clear, straightforward, that anybody reading this paper, another journalist, an editor, an investigative judge, or an international mission, they would all read the page, immediately understand what is a crime, what are the pillars, is there an intention, and what are the impressions of the person. Because I was not there with the witness, and I am not the one who got the whole idea. I don't have clear things related to that, but this will help me. The witness was really shocked, and there are some cultural sensitivities that I need to pay attention to. The witness memorized the testimony, and this is one of the most dangerous things. And this is a mistake by our side sometimes. If another journalist and investigator and a relief worker, if they keep asking the same witness 1 and 2 and 3 times, they may memorize their testimony. So sometimes we try to re-traumatize them to go somewhere else. So we need to be fully aware regarding all these points. And also, another important point, as we mentioned before, the witness is a human being. He is not a scoop. He is not an evidence or a proof of condemnation, because unfortunately, there are so many things that are dangerous and that may harm the person, the people, the community, and the cause that I am talking about, unless I understand that. And sometimes it would be really dangerous if I forget that this person represents all these dimensions, and I start pushing and pushing and pushing until I get the information I want. So the proper methodology needs to follow the do no harm principle. We need to respect the trauma. Should there be a trauma, I need to respect the culture. I need to understand that there is, for example, a gender-based dimension if it touches upon such things, particularly in Sudan. We also face that in Ukraine, if we want to follow the dimensions, and we are facing this with the prisoners who were released after taking their testimonies. So we really need to understand that sometimes we could be on a hurry to take the testimony or to get pieces of evidence or to collect pictures. So sometimes we could be hasty and we may take the testimony at the wrong time. And this happened a lot in Syria when prisoners were released. Sometimes you feel that families and journalists, they were questioning a person who has not seen the sun for 8 years, and they're so white and totally free from vitamin D. We see this when we deal with people who've been living underground. And sometimes when they ask him, "Are you Zakaria?" They say, "Are you Zakaria?" Say, "Yes, I am Zakaria." And his mother is sitting next to him saying, "No, mom, you're Muhammad. You're not Zakaria." So to that extent, they are traumatized. So you need to pay attention to this. Thank you. Thanks, Raji.
على يعني التنوير. حقيقة يعني كلنا بنحتاج
Thank you, Raji, for all this enlightenment. We all need to learn about this, especially when we talk about collecting testimonies from human resources in a crime war situation. Aziza, you've documented crimes related to collective punishment, demolition of homes, arrests, and so on. How do you differentiate between the administrative procedures or practices and other war crimes? You've taken trainings in this regard. How did these trainings improve your covering? And well, one important thing to mention when we talk about to an investigative report. However, this methodology should be followed by many, by all investigative journalists. The collection of testimonies, the way we do this, a journalist should learn and know and be knowledgeable about this. As for your question, I've been working as a journalist for 22 years. Um, Previously, I didn't have this knowledge about the difference that what I'm covering is a war crime or a violation or just administrative procedure, as Majdalena described it. It was just covering an event, demolition of a house or a seizure of a body. But afterwards, especially after we because our work is that defined into like we document things on the ground. In 2015-16 there was this uprising, the Jerusalem uprising, where there were field executions with a high rate, a very recurrent and a very wild. Al-Haq institution, which played a big role in documenting these war crimes, or at least to organize the files that are filed to the ICJ. They've targeted us, the journalists, on with a small training how to cover and document so that they would be able, as an institution, to use our reports in their files. And that was a turning point, really, the way we've started to handle the events and how to cover them. And afterwards, after our colleague Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, we really had to see things differently. When we do things, when we cover news or reports, we need to differentiate between what is a violation, what is a war crime, what is it according to the international law. How are these events classified? Was a good, it was a great benefit to me as a journalist and to the colleagues. We've mostly seen war crime reports and like good ones after the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. And many of these reports, investigative reports, and many of the things that had were done had preceded even the judicial files done by legals. So I, as an investigative journalist, as a journalist who works in the field, I started to note all these details. And of course, the trainings played a big role. Now, my work with Journalists Without Borders and learning about the killings of journalists in Gaza obliged me to review some files, some reports, for especially for those who were targeted. And then this is when I noted that we have some mistreatment to how we cover. There is something that this is some fractures in the way we report. And I noted that if those reporters had taken or had the chance to take these trainings that we had taken, they would have avoided such mistakes and they would have avoided even fatal mistakes. So the turning point, and this is not actually, I'm not propaganding for this and marketing for it, but the training that we had with Journalists Without Borders played a pivotal role, where we were able to connect these concepts easily, understand them, get widen our awareness. That's why I tell any journalist in war zones or work on investigative reports especially we work with with journalists who are cross borders, and this is not because I'm a Palestinian journalist. I should know this. I think every journalist should know all these details. That these reports, investigative reports, should tackle all sides, including legal aspects. Thank you, Aziza. And in this moment, we should actually commemorate the colleagues in Gaza who were killed and during this genocide that had taken place, that is still taking place. And actually, these were their work was the driver, even according to Al Haq institution. For the case that was filed to the ICJ, their work was the main source. So we salute them. We hope any of them was with us here, but this is an answer by itself that we should, the documenting a war crime, whether in Gaza or in Sudan or in Syria, is should be a collective effort. Maggie, back to you. You've documented the famine in Yemen, Sudan, and I'd like to ask you here. How can we differentiate between a famine that is based on like stemmed out of the war, or a famine where it is intentionally imposed by someone, by a criminal, a dictator? What are the sources that I need to learn about, or the information that I need to have in mind in order to differentiate? Actually, I had prepared a presentation on this. First of all, you need to prove that there's a famine. That this is when we need to understand what are the concepts. There's the IPC system, which is integrated phase classification system. This depends on a big number of data. Main three pieces of data is malnutrition among children, the mortality rates, and like 10,000 people, and of course the lack of food security. These three factors should be data of these three factors should be gathered and then sent to a team who is in charge of analyzing them. So what we've done in Sudan in 2024 was to learn about why the famine was the announcement of it was delayed or postponed. We visited in Sudan areas like Durman and Kordofan. It was clear that there was a famine. People were eating leaves of trees. No markets were opened. They were living on practically nothing. So why did the UN did not announce the famine? And there are many constraints for this because organizations who collect the data are sometimes unable to get into that area to do the needed survey. There's the and of course, this is maybe it's related to malnutrition, or maybe they cannot monitor the number of people deceased because of the famine and not because of a bulk shelling. So getting such information would be very difficult in at times, and the governments wouldn't be able to interfere. Sometimes the governments impede the work. So relief workers will be unable to spot all these things. In Yemen, they also play with data, and this is what we've done and worked on in a different investigative report, because that states that organizations sometimes they get false information and they cannot, accordingly, they cannot get assistance. So the data process or gathering the data, it becomes like it would be subject to many other factors. This is why the announcement of a famine would be delayed. And announcing a famine, this is where the donors need to know that there's a big need in a certain area, but not all time, not all, in all times and places they can access. Journalists, in order to prove that there's a famine, they need to be there in person in the field. And if not, they need to maybe seek the assistance of satellites, check how can satellites monitor the expansion of collective graves. We were able to identify these graves in Darfur before it was announced that it's a famine, and we were able to prove that there were many deaths due to famine. So also we need to gather the information, witnesses, or testimonies from witnesses or from those who had fled in order to learn more about all the details of the circumstances. In Khartoum, at the beginning of the war, there were areas that were completely isolated. They were out of everything. People started eating cats. That's what we heard in Khartoum. And it wasn't because uh, it's not because it was like any culture, agricultural issues, but because people could not make it to markets, so markets were closed. So first step we need to do is to know how to measure the famine, to understand its indicators. And a last important note here is that if you check relief web and relief response, every country that has a conflict would have a big number of phones and emails to all who work in a humanitarian response. Um, and there are many sites under that title because they identify the work through matrices. So that's how they classify the work. And those who work in shelter, in health. So there's special coordinations, and the open sources are already big there. And it's one of the things that if they want to cover a famine in a certain area, they would start with these classifications. Okay, and then we will continue for 10 minutes, and then we'll take the questions and answers. Thank you, Maggie. Maggie has published lately a chapter about the investigation on famine. It's in Arabic and in English, and we can we'll share it with ARIJ, and it'll be shared with you. Raji, in war areas, of course, there's chaos, targeting of witnesses. As a Palestinian journalists in Gaza were targeted. In Gaza, we've seen that YouTube where many thousands of videos were erased and deleted because they were condemning Israel for its practices. So how can we maintain the evidence? How can we maintain the chain of custody? And if you can maybe tell us more about it, how can we encounter this chaos? Thank you for your question. And I have just a comment regarding a famine. I uh, and first thing, and most important thing, if you want to file something to the court, you need to have the source, to provide the source and where was it, and the site for it. And we've faced this in Gaza, by the way. That was a problem. There are many journalists there who have collected important reports and met with witnesses, but at one point these witnesses were killed. These pictures were erased or were sent to us in a way where we could not obtain the metadata in the right way because Israeli soldiers are you know, censoring everything, and they would change. The ones who are in Shajaiya will show that they're in Cairo, for instance. So we need to follow the simplest methods. We need to think when this is sent to court, and in Arabic they use the word حرز. حرز in Arabic means that what is sent to them, and then it's stamped with the red wax. So that's what we say. We would form this حرز, which is the uh, 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 so when they die, it's like writing their will. They win. We need to do one, two, three. So what they do is the same. They will say, this is what we collected from that person in that day on that time in from the type of phone, the all detailed description in case the witness was killed or died. You need to have strong evidence. In ICJ, they would get something called secondary source, which becomes like a supportive evidence. But in other cases, it could be more complicated. So it's difficult to accept this evidence. So that's what we do. We collect one thing at a time, and as much as we can, um, we, uh, we start and we try to avoid sending through WhatsApp, Telegram, or or a signal. We try to send through eyewitness or by hand with someone else. We try to preserve it in a place where it wouldn't be perished. For instance, like the black box in Gaza. Gaza is filled with the black boxes, but that's why the Israeli government is banning journalists to go there because they know that Gaza is filled with black boxes and they've killed as much as they could. Yet there are people who have collected valuable information that could condemn them in a bigger way. So my most important thing it's the metadata that should be clear, should be preserved, and should be collected well. Protection starts when either with like to have a quote and defragmentation. All these points would be or the evidence would be fragmented, and I'm sure that my colleagues have been trained on this because I need to protect myself and protect the witnesses as well in case they were caught. This is one. In other areas like Fasher or in Gaza, the goal is that there's a will for the judiciary, and that's something important that many things can change, everything can change. So even the method of dealing might change. When the journalists are conducting an investigative report about like corruption or fraud, things would become very complicated when we seek to protect the evidence and preserve it. Regarding famine, the last case we've worked on was in Yarmouk 2011, 2013. It's a Palestinian refugee camp who were subject to famine. Legally, we faced an issue first. And that was with the world as our authority, that how can were we able to convince the judge that this is isolated and subject to famine. So we needed to have a legal description that was very accurate and This is when things, the whole game changes. We need to prove that people are not able to leave or come back, or they're isolated, they're blocked. And I worked on reports in Ukraine last year and this year. So I need to revert to some reports or someone who can. We need to differentiate and like to classify. Food security is important, so we need to classify this first. For instance, in Gaza, many carbs are getting into Gaza, and I would, and this is where they claim that okay, here the 2,500 calories are secured. But this is what? This is over 6 years health-wise. What's the impact of that? And when you check the health of people, I've sent them a baby formula for Nestle, and then you say this baby formula is not is banned to be in the markets of Europe because it's filled with sugar. Or we've sent them mobiles that include games. So security of fuel, food, environment, personal security, that's how they should be classified, and then they would be tackled one at a time. Thank you. Thank you. One last question before we open the floor to Q&A. Aziza, in your investigations, you met prisoners, tortured, by the occupying forces. How did you deal with them without traumatizing them or dragging them into trauma again? Actually, we try as much as we can, but actually, at many times we fail, especially that being there in the field, meaning that you're there after the first trauma directly. There's a mom who would have her four sons killed after they've been shot by a missile, and then you see her after that, right after. Then, what do you think the interview would look like? I'm one of those people who prefer that during a gathering, my testimony is to approach women, not because I'm biased with women, but through experience. I know that they have this capacity to narrate the details in a more accurate way, especially in a conflict zone where we live. Men would consider, oh, that's become normal. But women are more accurate in this. At the same time, it's a two-sided weapon. Women are more fragile than men are. And so how can we what can we do? I have like my own style. Like I'm a Palestinian. I live there. We live in the same circumstances. Many of my colleagues ask me, how were you able to convince her? Well, I I endure what they've been through. I've been living there. I know their mentality. So I believe this is important. This has helped me a lot in my work with them. And the second thing is that I did the homework. I have the journalists who start with victims like from above, and that's what Maggie said. We should have like a preliminary work to facilitate the matter. You're not there for them to interrogate them. Many times, journalists who have never covered conflict areas would note this, because journalism is not a random profession, and actually we would be regarded as like, what are you doing here? What added value do you have? We need to level up with them and try to obtain as much as we can. It's a mechanism where you need to be close to them, be more familiar with them, so as to let them open up. At the same time, there's this problem about um, when a challenge is that when someone is subject to a trauma, for instance, sometimes they have these insinuations, the ideas, they start hallucinating. My son opened his eyes once I bid him farewell, because I know this is not true, but then I know what I would write down, what I would document. So working also with organizations, especially foreign organizations, have given me this merit that I know now in my work, daily work. I don't depend on one source only. In the testimony itself, I usually try to get two or three at a time. Later on, I would decide who to uh, pick for my report. Once I verified that the information I collected was true, many of the information I gather about torture in jails from prisoners, and so we try to give them this guarantees that I will hide your face, your name would be factuous. We need to create this trust between a journalist and the victim and the prisoners. Okay, 5 6 minutes questions. We'll start with you.
وبعدين بنشوف إذا بنقدر ناخذ الباقي. تفضل.
صباح الخير.
Ah,
شكرا مجدلين.
Good
شكرا
morning. Thank you,
للجميع.
Majdoline and
سؤالي
all.
للسيد راجي.
My question to Mr. Raji.
بعد
After the traumas that all humanity has been through in the last decade, do you think there should be a change in the methodology of documentation so that not to be not to only have the testimonies of survivors or victims, but also from the perpetrators, like what happened in Nablus lately, where the Israeli police and soldiers have executed those victims who have surrendered already, and then they've executed them right then in front of cameras. And the Israeli official was proud of this, and he said, "Well, that was beyond the legal framework, but these are heroes that need to be promoted." So, and this is where they violated well, what is in the international law. This is where the perpetrator declares proudly that they've committed a crime and a violation of law. Thank you for the question. As I just said, in court should prove the nature of a crime. In this sort, the official was he aware of the crime before it's been executed? That's where he will be held accountable, legal accountability. But if he was not aware and he just heard about it, and this is where we call it impunity. And that's why we need to have a complainer. We need someone to complain. But regretfully, most legal cases in most courts, except in one, it's the crime of aggression, which is not recognized by many countries, need to have a clear a legal persona that should be aware of the crime. So let's imagine I was there during that crime, and I handed these victims to the soldiers, knowing that they would be killed. This is where I'm held responsible, and I would be held accountable. But this is a long thing, and we need to discuss it in more details. Okay, Dima, and then we will conclude, and you're all invited to lunch and to pose all the questions you have. Thank you, Majdoline Janad from Arab TV. Maggie, since you have this big experience in Sudan, I will continue to what Raji has just said. Now, after the siege of Al Fasher, there's another big media blockade. We receive a big number of videos, and we need so long to verify the credibility of such videos. So we don't have except the testimonies of victims. In this case, what do we do when we only have the testimonies of victims, especially when if we're not in the field? what can we do? The other point is opposite to Gaza, we have a clear perpetrator there, which is the occupying soldiers. In Sudan, the conflict actors are many, and the Sudanese soldier, and there are other parties who accuse the support militias. So that's how we feel that there are many intertwined entities. We and many, of course, contradicting reports. We as journalists, how can what should we do with the perpetrators when they are inside actors? Thank you. And one of the big questions regarding Fasher is where those who were able to make it to the borders, a small percentage, a very small percentage from Fasher. So the main question is that where have they gone? There's Harvard Humanitarian Lab who use satellite big time with the very updated technologies. They have the ability, they were able to verify that most citizens or inhabitants were killed. So maybe such technologies could help out. And I do agree with you. This is one of the hindrances that is not solved yet. Thank you, Maggie. I am sorry, but we're asked to conclude this session. They're here, they're generous with their time, they're ready to answer your questions. I'm sorry, I have to close this session because we're preparing for the next. You can please pose your question to them. Finally, I'd like to thank ARIJ Network for providing this opportunity, this valuable opportunity to have this session in this forum. Thanks for all the speakers. Thank you very much.